Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. حي على الصلاة، حي على الصلاة، حي على الفلاح، حي على الفلاح. الله أكبر، الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونؤمن به ونتوكل عليه أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Once again, brothers and sisters, before getting into the things of today, I'm asking to remember our brothers and sisters throughout this ummah of the Prophet Muhammad to the stress or suffering, whether we know the cause of that stress or suffering or not. Let us remember our brothers and sisters in a country that historically has been known as the bread basket of the entire continent. And I'm making reference to the country of Sudan. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gifted this land out for centuries with a very fertile land. So even in modern times today, that this country at various times, contemporary times, has been able to be the bread basket for the continent of Africa. But what we are seeing today in Sudan is that there are at least 1 million people who are near starvation. And this 1.7 million people who are estimated to be starving are because of a conflict between two parties. One, a party in the government that is not leaving, and another party that's trying to get them out and replace them. And these two warring parties are bringing about, and I'm not condemning individuals, but just the acts that are being committed. But these acts are causing just pain and suffering and starvation in a country, as I said, that has been known as the bread basket of all for the African continent. And so let us pray for our brothers and sisters. Just recently, I got information that there was an aid that was destined, it was designated to help feed these starving people, but one of these parties attacked this warehouse, took all of the food that was reputed to have been able to feed close to 1 million individuals. Again, I'm not criticizing, I'm not talking about individuals because there are good people on both sides of this conflict. But the actions that are taking place are causing harm to the people in the nation. So let us remember our brothers and sisters in Sudan. Let us continue to make dua for our brothers and sisters in the occupied land of Philistine, of Palestine. You know, we've been talking about it for a while, but it's finally seeping out, that what is going on in the West Bank, the occupied West Bank today, is reminiscent of what happened in those early years when the Israeli state was first established and this Nakba, this disaster took place to take people's homes and drive people out of their homes. And on the West Bank today, look at the beautiful city of Nablus, just by way of example. This beautiful city, I've seen it, I've been there a couple of times. Look at this beautiful place. And what we see happening today is that the people, the Muslims, the Palestinian people in Nablus are being driven out of their homes, and the other folks are coming, just taking their houses, taking their property. Very reminiscent of what happened in 1948 when 400 villages were just cleared out and people, property taken and people killed. Most of this nonsense that's going on in the West Bank today, as we've talked about it before, it's not coming so much from Israeli soldiers. They are protecting these settlers. They are helping them to remove, to kill, to take the property, even as we sit and stand here today, to take the property of the Palestinian people. So let us remember our brothers and sisters. As word starts coming out that after over 27,000 people have been slaughtered like animals, like shooting fish in a barrel, raining down bombs on helpless people, not on soldiers fighting against them, raining down, blowing up hospitals. There's not a single hospital in Gaza today that has not been partially or totally destroyed. The word is coming out now. Citizen journalists are recording how IDF soldiers are going into hospitals and killing the patients who are in these hospitals that often don't have electricity, they don't have anesthesia, but yet they're not dying fast enough. So soldiers are going into the hospital, shooting and killing the people in the hospitals with little problems. That, oh, I hurt my hand. Oh, my back hurts. My knee hurts. I'm ashamed that I've ever complained about any ailment that I've ever had when I see what's unfolding in front of our eyes today throughout this ummah of the Prophet Muhammad. Brothers and sisters, are not going to take long. But I want to go back and deal with something very basic again and fundamental to our success in getting closer to the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's our fear. It's the forgiveness. Of course, the ultimate forgiveness is the forgiveness that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives to his servants. There's no greater forgiveness than for you and I, for those who have believed in the past, and those who will believe in the future. There's no greater astaghfir than astaghfirullah, seeking the forgiveness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and understanding what that means when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgives us. What is a process that you and I have to go through? Is it just automatic? Because my name is what my name is, it is automatically Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to forgive us for those things that we've done that are inconsistent, that are against what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has commanded for us to do. Brothers and sisters, for those of us who have embraced Islam at a later age, not having grown up with the guidance of Islam, it means so much when you are an adult and you take Shahada and you think about all the things that you've done that have been against what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has commanded for us to do as human beings. And then someone tells you everything that you've done up to this point in your life is off the books. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgives you once you embrace Islam. Nothing that you've done, no matter how horrible it may have been, nothing will you have to account for on Qiyamah, because the most merciful has extended this promise, this word. Once you embrace Islam, everything that you've done wrong is forgiven. We're given a clean slate, and it's left up to us what we put on this clean record that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us simply by consciously submitting and saying that we're submitting our free will to the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Brothers and sisters, you know, there are episodes that we find in the history of Islam during the time of the Prophet Muhammad that are so can instruct us so much as to what forgiveness actually means. Let me just start with the example, of course, with the Prophet Muhammad himself. That there is a surah in the Quran, and this surah, Abasa, is one that the history about it, and you know the history better than I, but the history of the surah is that there was a blind man, Abdullah ibn Maktoum, who had just recently embraced Islam. And he came, he heard the Prophet Muhammad's voice, and he wanted to ask the Prophet Muhammad for instruction about this beautiful way of life that he had just recently embraced. And at the time that he approached the Prophet Muhammad, the messenger of Allah was talking to a group of very prominent and influential Meccans. The Prophet Muhammad understood that if these guys become Muslim, that it will strengthen the entire Muslim community. It won't just be a benefit for their souls, that the Muslims, the torture, the torment that they were undergoing at that time, that if these guys that I'm talking to, if they become Muslim, it'll back up some of the back off of us, some of the problems that we're having with the disbelievers of Mecca. So Ibn Maktoum, being blind, heard the Prophet Muhammad's voice. He had no idea who he could have been talking to. So he goes up to the Prophet Muhammad and begins to question the Prophet Muhammad. Answer some of the questions that I have. I'm a believer now. I want to know about this thing. And this surah tells us that the Prophet Muhammad in this Abasa is talking about the Prophet Muhammad how he frowned and kind of turned away from this blind man. Ibn Maktoum didn't know who he was talking to. He didn't know what was in the mind of the Prophet Muhammad. He wanted knowledge about this deen as it had been revealed at that time to the Prophet. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala corrects the Prophet Muhammad, reveals a surah talking about how the Prophet Muhammad SAW frowned and turned away. Abasa wa tawalla, that the Prophet frowned and turned away. I was reading some tafsir on Quran recently. And if this tafsir is correct, and I have no reason to doubt it, that I've had a misconception about that ayah and that episode all of my Muslim life. I thought the Prophet Muhammad SAW, up until reading this incredible tafsir, I thought the Prophet Muhammad SAW kind of turned away and scrunched up his face and why is this guy bothering me? But this tafsir was saying that the Prophet ﷺ was basically, this frown was just an eyebrow, just started going up, something that the blind man couldn't even see, even the smallest rejection of what he was doing, he couldn't see it because the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was not saying, get out of my face, don't you see I'm busy. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, in his gracious manner, he frowned with an eyebrow, with maybe raising an eyebrow. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in a surah corrected him. And how do you know that these people that you're talking to are going to be of more benefit than this blind man that you won't take the time to meet him? Like I said, what is this a complete diss? Like, get out of my face. But he was, the Islam was so intent in what he was doing. And even that smallest thing, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala corrected him on. The Prophet Muhammad SAW, when we look at what was the history of Ibn Maktoum after this event, Allah knows best. But the Prophet Muhammad SAW appointed a blind man to be one of the mu'adhins, to call the people to prayer. And what's the most important aspect of a mu'adhin? I'm not talking about in today's age. You just look on our phones, go to an app, go to Muslim Pro, it tells us exactly, based on calculations, when the sun is arriving, set, and where it's going to be at a certain time of the day. They didn't have that. So it's a very important responsibility for mu'adhins to be able to look into the sky and see the position of the sun and make a determination that now I'll call the adhan. This is the right time to call. The Prophet Muhammad SAW appointed a blind man who couldn't see what was going on. Read this history. There was Sahaba that came to the Prophet Muhammad SAW, not challenging him, but just asking the question, how is Abdullah ibn Maktoum? How is he going to be able to tell us when it's time to make prayer? He can't see. And the Prophet Muhammad SAW said, there'll be someone to inform him. You can see. You tell him when it's time to call, but this is my mu'adhin. The Prophet Muhammad SAW, I'm not trying to give the impression that he'd done something so horrible, but he showed us that when someone, after embracing Islam, that we, you and I, if we think we slighted and hurt their feelings in any kind of way, that we need to go overboard, not seeking reward from that person, but knowing, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has promised us in the Quran, that when we get that forgiveness, when we forgive someone, seeking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's pleasure, that our reward is guaranteed from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Let me give a couple of quick examples, and I'll be done. You and I know that after the revelation of the Quran in 16, in the common era, that for the next 20 years, there were two individuals amongst the Meccans who were nightmares for any of the believers. One was Khalid ibn Walid. The other was Abdullah ibn al-As, Amr al-As. These two were just a nightmare for the believers, that they were constantly finding ways to torture, to deny liberty for anyone who followed the Prophet Muhammad and say that I'm following the guidelines from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. For 20 years, they were some of the worst enemies on the battlefield and off the battlefield, fighting against the Muslims in the Battle of Badr, fighting against them in Uhud. That they were a constant presence for almost 20 years, oppressing the Muslims at every opportunity that they had. But then, when the Prophet Muhammad had this dream, that I dreamed that we were making tawaf around the house. We're going to make ummah. They dressed, they put the sacrificial garlands around the necks of the sacrificial animals. They made their way going to Mecca to make ummah. The word came down that Muhammad is coming. He's got so many people with him. I know he's coming for war. They had no intention to fight anyone. And this was about 628, 629. In 628. At this particular point, they were stopped. I mean, do a short version of the story. They were stopped by some of the Meccans. And there was a negotiation. No, you're not coming in here to make ummah. What you can do, maybe within next year, come back again. We'll let you come next year. But you can't make ummah on this particular year, on this particular occasion. You and I know that there is some disagreement amongst the leading Sahaba as to whether or not they should allow these people to turn them around. But then it was accepted begrudgingly, because the Prophet Muhammad said, let's just go back to Mecca. And this was a treaty that at the time there were 1,200 known Muslims on the face of the earth. Within 2 years of that treaty, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had increased the number of Muslims to 10,000. And this, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala characterized that treaty, this was a tremendous success. This was a victory for the Muslims. But many of the Muslims were too short-sighted to be able to see how there could be any victory or success coming from having to go back to Mecca after preparing so much to do to make the Ummah on that particular year. Brothers and sisters, during that peaceful time, we had Amr ibn As embracing Islam, standing beside Khalid ibn Walid. Two of the greatest enemies of Islam up to this point during this treaty period, they embraced Islam. And how did the Prophet Muhammad respond to them? But I don't know whether you're sincere or not. Did he say that you can become Muslim, but I'm going to keep my eye on you because I don't trust you? You've killed so many of my brothers over the years, for 2 decades. You're killing Muslims. And now you're coming to be saying that you're a Muslim. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put the forgiveness in the heart of the Prophet Muhammad that he understood that once someone embraces Islam, everything that they've done, no matter how horrible it may have been, all of that is forgiven. And so we have these two figures, illustrious figures who contributed so much on the battlefield, who did contribute so much in the spread and development of Islam. Now they're in the ranks of the Muslims after having been the greatest enemies that the Muslims had over a period of time. Brothers and sisters, the challenge that you and I have today is nothing. Talking about right here in Winston-Salem, right here in the United States, is nothing compared to what was happening at the time of the Prophet and what the Muslims had to endure, the level of forgiveness that they had to give to people they saw killing their brothers and sisters. And so when we have such just real, such locked in, such clear examples of how brothers and sisters forgave us excesses of those before Islam, I have to ask myself, where did I get off? How is it that I can be unforgiving to a Muslim brother and sister for some mistake that they've made? Is it that I forget everything that I've done wrong? Do I think that you and I have a past just because we're Muslim? Do we think that we should be so self-righteous that when someone makes a mistake, we want to talk about them, we want to backbite them, we want to put them down, not reminding ourselves that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who forgives. We can forgive on this worldly level, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who forgives. We can accept. We have a level of forgiveness, but we have to accept the rights of brotherhood and sisterhood that we have with one another. We don't have the right to talk bad about a brother or sister who's made a mistake or a series of mistakes. We have a responsibility to forgive them if we see that they are sincere in being sorry and asking for forgiveness for anything they've done wrong. Brothers and sisters, over the last few years, I've had the opportunity to be in sessions with individuals in different parts of the world who were not born into Muslim families that were not Muslim, but who later in life embraced Islam. I was at a convention not too long ago, and a brother, I think he was a member of parliament in the Netherlands, and he was the chairperson or the head of a political party whose platform is based on the hatred of Muslims. He was the leader of the party. He was the one who's helping to craft the kind of policy and proposals from this party saying, let's get all of the Muslims out of this country. They're no good. They're terrorists. Get them out. They don't belong here. He's even talking about those people from the country who have embraced Islam. He wanted no Muslims in that country. He couldn't tolerate the thought of those mosques being constructed in his country. He couldn't tolerate hearing the adhan. It was offensive to him to see Muslim women in full hijab. But now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guided this man to Islam. And at this particular convention, I had the opportunity to talk with him for a while, but he was publicly describing how hateful he was and how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has turned his heart and guided him to Islam. And so, what responsibility do the Muslims have now that he's turned away from this hateful stuff, something that's against Islam? He's no longer there. He's not proposing any of that nonsense. He's a believer in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The same is happening all over this country. Members of the Ku Klux Klan who may have been outside your house burning a cross. Now Allah is guiding them to Islam. Our responsibility is to accept those who come to Islam to accept those who are Muslim and who make mistakes and then return to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in their actions, in their beliefs. So let us pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala puts forgiveness in our hearts and strengthen our commitment to be accepting of our brothers and sisters. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give us an understanding of this deen that is useful for us in this world and in the next. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not make this kingdom of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam an operative test for the disbelieving. Brothers and sisters, first one is that we have a lot. The first one is that there are a number of brothers and sisters that have challenging health circumstances.